ask him to,
Good evening. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Caldwell Hearing Examiner for December 7th, 2021. I serve in both a decision-making capacity and an advisory capacity to the mayor and city council. There are two types of public hearings this commission conducts. The first is a legislative hearing whereby we formulate recommendations on certain land use requests. My recommendations are then forwarded on to the city council, who makes decisions on legislative matters. The second type of public hearing is a quasi-judicial in nature, meaning that the requests are specific to a parcel of land. I'm authorized to make decisions on requests for special use permits, variances, preliminary plat, decision, time extensions, and plan unit developments that do not involve the subdivision of land. However, any decision I may make tonight is by no means final. Anyone that believes he or she has been aggrieved by my decision has a right to file an appeal to the city council. On quasi-judicial requests that involve the subdivision of land, rezones, and annexation, I am authorized to only make recommendations to the city council who will make the final decision. The hearing procedures as required by the Idaho Code are as follows. 1, the staff will first present a report on the application. 2, the applicant or applicant's representatives will then present the summary of the request. 3, testimony of those in support will be taken, followed by testimony from those in neutral position, followed by those in opposition. I will allow the applicant or applicant's representatives rebuttal. After rebuttal testimony is given, public testimony is closed, and no new oral or written testimony will be allowed unless I elect to reopen the testimony. The time limits for testimonies are as follows. The applicant receives 10 minutes. All others receive 5 minutes, including the rebuttal. I accept oral and written testimony from those in attendance, but only if you sign the sign-up sheet that's in front of the room and been sworn in. When testifying before me, you must come to the podium, state your full name and address, and acknowledge that you've been sworn in. I ask everyone to treat all parties with fairness and respect. I will not tolerate any outbursts, clapping, and unruly jeers. I also ask that those in the room, please turn off your cell phones. I'm a volunteer hearings examiner and receive a small compensation for my efforts. I'm charged by law to keep a clear record of the proceedings, consider factual testimony, and stay within the city's and state's rules and regulations. We, the city staff, thank you for your courtesy to us and others as we move through the process. And with that, we'll have people who wish to testify stand up and be sworn in, please.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes.
Thank you very much. First order of business, we had an action item scheduled that will be continued. This is case number 821-1, B8021-1. Will be continued to January 25th, 2022 at the Hearings Examiner meeting. This is a request by TO Engineering on behalf of Bradley Lasher for annexation PUD of preliminary plat for enclave subdivision. So if you're here in regards to that action item, that will be continued to January 25th. Thank you very much. The next item of business, approve the minutes for the November 9th, 2021 meeting. And, there's one correction on that. For old business, we will begin with, case number SUP 2110, continued from, November 16th. Request by, Jose Melendez for a special use permit for outdoor automotive storage on 1.59 acres in the C3 zone. The property is located at 5524 Laster Lane, Caldwell, Idaho. And, with that, I would ask the staff to please make the presentation.
Mr. Hearing Examiner Jerome Knapp, Planning Director for the City of Caldwell, 621 Cleveland Boulevard, here in Caldwell. As stated, this is a request by Jose Melendez at 5524 Laster Lane. Oh, and I've been sworn in.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
It's my associate planner, it's me.
Okay, you're good to go.
He's doing his job. The request is for outdoor automotive storage on 1.59 acres in the C3 zone. Property is located, as mentioned, is 5524 Laster Lane. The applicant submitted a request for a roundtable on July 15, 2021, to discuss the construction of a structure they identified as a pole building on his property. The applicant, who owns this property, has owned it for 10 years. And during the meeting, it was determined that Mr. Melendez's land use was not in compliance to the current zoning ordinance, that he would need to apply for a special use permit to operate his current outdoor automotive storage business in the C3 zone. The proposed building that he would be placing on the site, once approved, is a storage building to store his classic cars out of the elements. Mr. Melendez also owns the property at 5521 Laster Lane, where he operates a mechanic shop. It used to be a location of the Idaho State Towing for many years. Vehicles are stored at 5524 Laster and repaired and serviced at 5521 Laster, just to give some background. The current zoning classifications in the surrounding area. To the north is commercial service. To the south is also commercial service. East as well. But on the west side, we have commercial service and industrial. In the staff report, we identify the requirements in regards to the code requirements, I should say, for public services, transportation, connectivity, landscaping, parking, and fencing, which is all required. In particular, the engineering department had three areas, right-of-way access and stormwater requirements, and there was one more regarding roadways. The fire department during the roundtable had two concerns. One was a turnaround on the site and a knock box on the structure. The fire department had two concerns regarding landscaping, 10-foot landscaping strip buffer on Laster Lane, and a 6-foot site securing fence along the four corners of the property. The comprehensive plan analysis you have before you. staff would recommend approval of this request based upon that the site is currently existing. The use is currently existing, at least for 10 years. But there's a number of requirements to make sure that this use is compliant to city code. If you look at the aerial, the area that's in yellow would be the location of the fence except for one master. The applicant would have to provide a turnaround, as mentioned by the fire department, a site plan regarding where they propose to place the structure. And the hearing there may want to ask more details about that. What our department would expect is the final site plan that meets all the city requirements as mentioned in the staff report. That's my presentation, Mr. Hearing Examiner. I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. I do have a question about the structure that's on there, on the road frontage. What's the nature of that structure, and is that going to remain?
I believe the round table that it was, but I think Mr. Mann is about to respond to that.
And then they propose a pole barn type of structure for the storage?
For the storage, that has not, we have not seen that building nor its location, but he would have to provide also parking, depending on how the site is laid out. Those are things that will still be required, and that's why we'll be asking for a complete site plan that meets all the city requirements.
And Mr. Mapp, we have some, 12 conditions of approval proposed for this. You feel they cover the basis as far as achieving the goals of this application?
Yes, Mr. Examiner. The majority of these goals, I believe, are coming from the round table that we had with the applicant. I reviewed the concerns that the building planning, engineering, fire department had that was discussed at that round table. And those will have been incorporated into these conditions, as well as code requirements regarding fencing, parking, landscaping, and of course the additions from the engineering department.
And I had one question, Mr. Mapp, on item 8.12. Applicant shall enter into a deferral agreement for the frontage improvements along Laster Lane. What's the nature of that? I'm a little confused by that statement.
I'll let Mr. McDonald respond to that.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Certain improvements on properties. Yes.
Sworn in.
Rob McDonald, 621 Cleveland Boulevard, and I have been sworn in.
Thank you.
There are certain improvements on properties that trigger by city code frontage improvements, which include curb, gutter, and sidewalk. Generally, those are required at the time of construction. However, those can be deferred if it's shown that there's no other existing infrastructure in that area, which in this case, there is no curb, gutter, or sidewalk adjacent to this parcel. And so the nature of the deferral agreement is that those are obligations on the property. However, they will be deferred through an agreement so that they do not have to be constructed at this time as part of this project.
Thank you, Mr. Donald. I have a question for Mr. Mapp. Was there a code violation that incentive for this application, or is it?
Mr. Chairman, that's a good question, because I asked that of my code enforcement staff, and there were no code violations. The only reason why we found out that this applicant had not complied to our general conditions is because of request for a new building on the site.
And then, I'm a little vague on the nature, the goal of this application is just to clean the site up, get meeting the land safety requirements, egress requirements and so forth. Is it more of a bring it into the?
Bring it in compliance.
Okay.
To the code.
Okay, great. And that's what I was looking for.
And the applicant's been, from our conversation, been willing to meet those conditions.
And, Mr. Mack, is there a deadline on, this compliance?
Once we get a site plan, we'll review that, but basically, things just looking at the site, the fencing would be something that, would take time, but the applicant told me that, he had the materials to start working on that as soon as possible. I think on the inside of the property, what we would expect is some type of alignment when we talked about the fire department being able to maneuver their trucks. So we'll be looking at turnaround, parking if need be, paving. So to answer the question is that I did not think of a timeline. I think that's something we can work with the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Mack. I didn't see one in there. Typically, the ordinance itself addresses an expiration on an SUP. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what is that?
If I remember correctly, 3 years.
Years.
Application within 12 months, completion in 24 months.
And Mr. Mack, do you feel that's adequate to address the time frame for this accomplishing these tasks?
Yes.
Okay.
And I would consider making that as a condition.
Okay. Well then, that's all the questions I have for staff. Thank you, Mr. Mack. And I'd like to ask Mr. Jose Yalanes to make your presentation, please.
Can I speak?
Okay, sure. Absolutely. Did you sign the sheet here?
Do I need to sign his sheet?
Yeah.
Or is his signature?
Right here. We just need a record of the witness.
Okay.
State your name.
My name is Larry Stevenson. I'm here on behalf of Jose Milanes. I've been working with Jose for...
your address and have you been sworn in?
my address is 26011 Pioneer Lane, Parma, Idaho. And yes, I did swear in.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I've been working with Jose for many years, on this project, so I can answer, a little bit better, a lot of, the questions that you have. If I could start by saying, I know what's going on, and I'm a little confused myself as to requirements, which requirements are for, the conditional use permit for automotive storage, and which, conditions are for, the building permit. But I believe that's something that we can work out at another time, but we agree that all the conditions that are required for both are, acceptable. The fencing is probably 3/4 of the way done. It's just a little bit on the east side of the house, between his house and the next door neighbor's house, which is thoroughly obscured by a wooden fence and brush and trees. And that is his residence, that he's lived in since then. And the front is his yard. And then there's his driveway on the east side of his entrance to his house, for his daily drivers. And, he has already put in, the fire truck turnaround, because we found out early on that was gonna be a requirement. And as far as the conditional use permit for automotive storage, when he purchased the property, it had been currently used, by a towing company, for their storage. And when he purchased it, and I thought as well that the zoning was industrial, which would allow, long-term vehicle storage. But upon applying for a building permit, we found out that that was not the case. So that's what we're trying to iron out first, to bring it into compliance. And then we can worry about, the structure. All those vehicles are privately owned for his business. Those vehicles are not stored by other people, for customers. He owns a used car lot, so the vehicles he has stored in there, are basically waiting their turn. So it's not that, those vehicles are for somebody else. They are all individually owned by him and his company. I think that pretty much covered the points that I wanted to make. Did you have questions?
Yes, thank you, for your testimony, Mr. Stevenson. The first question I asked for staff is, what you answered, that's Mr. Milan's private residence on the property. And that's going to remain, that's not gonna change at all?
No.
Okay, I just wanted to get that. And then, there's, part of the condition, what we're doing here is trying to get a site plan, for meeting the code, for the kind of things that are going on, the uses on this property. And, so that's the basic, content of, the application and the special use permit. And, just for your, information, the conditions for the use are the conditions here in the staff report, the 12 conditions that I mentioned earlier. That's very specific to just this. The building type conditions are part of the Uniform Building Code. It's administered by City of Caldwell. It's a whole different, ball of wax. We're not talking about those.
Okay.
But this will direct your friend to come up with a site plan and, building plans, whatever required, to basically put this up to the standards of the zoning code. And so what we want to accomplish here, with this special use permit is, to get a site plan and building plans that will bring the property into conformance. And, the main question that I addressed, Mr. Knapp about is a timeline on this, and then I'd like to ask you, and Mr. Moaz, about what do you think is a reasonable time frame to develop a set of plans?
The builder that's actually, going to build the building, says that he has now, all the building plans and site plans.
Okay.
Because we knew this was coming, it was just, when can he get that? So, I'm under the impression that he has those right now, and we can submit those as soon as possible.
Well, well, let's turn as soon as possible, and to give you days, weeks, specific time frame. I'll address the question to you later, but just, have you discussed this?
He's saying 2 weeks, just to make sure that we can get it into the proper departments.
We want to work with you on this, you want to get done right, and, so I'll talk to this other gentleman about that, but just want to get a ballpark time frame of what you think is doable. You know, we all want to, achieve the same end here, you know, without any complications, so, that's one of the things I'm going to talk about in my recommendation or in my decision. So,
and the other requirements that they mentioned between 12 and 24 months, I believe those are acceptable timelines as
that's
well.
for the completion of everything.
Right.
Okay.
And we'll have to narrow down exactly what's his front yard versus what's landscaping and things like that.
Okay, and there's only a point, we issue a special use permit, the ordinance itself has these timelines as part of the code.
Right.
And, essentially it says that everything will be done, in that time frame, or it disappears, you start over.
Right.
Okay, so just to clarify that, Mr. Stevenson, do you have any more, questions for me, or, statements from your friend?
No, I believe we're pretty clear now.
Okay, thank you. I would like, would you like to please come up and sign in, and go and testify? State your name and address, please, and if you've been sworn in.
Yeah, it's Steve Burton. I haven't been sworn in, no.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Burton. Please, just fill me in on your role in this, which,
Yeah, I'm the contractor,
okay,
and, in the first place, we had everything ready to submit, and we actually submitted everything before we found out we had to go through the other process.
Mhm.
So everything's ready to submit again. My son does all that for me.
Okay,
And, so, I don't know, a fair time within 30 days, do you think, to resubmit everything? We can get it done. And, I do have a, kind of a picture of kind of what it's gonna look like. I don't know if you want to see that or don't really matter.
yes, if you have a copy of that, I would like to have that as an exhibit. Yes, I would please.
Okay, you want me to?
Yeah, yeah, gotcha. Thanks. Okay, and so Mr. Burton, you're doing the building and fencing and,
We're just doing the building,
okay, not landscaping?
no,
Okay,
just the building itself. Jose has been, he almost has all the fence up already,
okay,
and it looks really nice. And then, all the drive, the requirements, that's all in for the fire truck turnaround. And, so, yeah, and then, I guess they talked to you or whoever about, they need some time to get the landscaping and the sidewalk and gutter in.
yeah. So, is this going to be, you put power to the building? Plumbing and power?
No,
Okay,
and if he does have that done, he'll have to hire a plumber and
okay.
electrical, but I'm not sure what he's gonna do there.
And are you doing any paving for
No.
this? Okay.
But the shop will have concrete floor,
Mhm.
because it's gonna be dry storage.
Okay. Great. Anything else you got on that?
No,
I appreciate it. Thank you for your testimony.
you bet, thank you.
Mr. Knapp, please.
Oh, I was just gonna mention, Mr. Hearing Examiner, that, with the building permit, landscaping plan needs to be submitted at the same time.
I'm sorry,
When they make their application for a building permit, we need to have the landscaping plans at the same time.
correct. And Mr. Knapp, do you have any response to our discussion with the applicant representatives?
No,
Do you have any questions on that?
no.
Okay, fine. And the applicant is allowed to rebuttal to anything that, if you wanted to address any of the issues that come up. Care to speak? Okay, with that, I'll close the hearing, and get the analysis there. By the way, there's no other, person signed up for testimony, and we do have this, exhibit SUP 2110, exhibit 1, to enter into the record. So, case number, SUP 1614, in Miranda's Outdoor Automotive Storage and Building. The finding is facts, are as follows. The Caldwell hearing examiner accepts the facts outlined in the staff report, public testimony, and the evidence list. All adopted city ordinances, standards, and the codes were used in evaluating the application. Proposed use is conditionally permitted by the terms of the ordinance and is subject to the conditions of approval. Section 7, the conclusions of law. The Caldwell hearing examiner has the authority to hear the case in order to be approved or denied. The public notice requirements were met, and the hearing was conducted within the guidelines of applicable Idaho code and city ordinances. the order of decision, section 8. Based on the findings of fact and conclusions of law, the hearing examiner hereby orders that case number SUP 21-10, request by Jose Milanes for a special use permit for outdoor automotive storage on 1.59 acres in a C3 service commercial zoning district for the property located at 5524 Laster Lane, Caldwell, Idaho, is approved with the following conditions of approval. And on page 5 and 6 of the staff report, there are conditions of approval, 8.2 through 8.14, that address the special use permit, request. I'm going to add, condition 8.15 for a timeline, and, the timeline, for the architectural drawings and the site plan, including the landscape, there shall be 30 days, from this date, for the plan submittal. Mr. Knapp?
Due to the, Christmas week when things kind of slow down, I would give it maybe 40 days, 45 days.
Okay, yeah, it is the holiday season, and we don't want to put undue pressure on anybody. The staff suggestion will make that 45 days for the plan, submittal, the site plan, and the building plan, from, today's date. And then, the, planning director, upon receipt of those plans and evaluating the plans, will have the prerogative to establish a deadline for completion of those plans, if it is going to accommodate those plans and the execution of them. And that's over and above the timeline that is part and parcel of the ordinance. And with that, I close this hearing, and good luck. And the next case we have, this is action item 3, case number CMP 21-1 and ZON 21-2, the Eisenberg rezone, which is continued from November 16th, and request by the land group to amend the 2040 comprehensive plan designation from commercial and service to manufacturing and production for the parcel R35307 of 17.61 acres located at 4210 Highway 2026. Concur request for the rezone of the subject parcel from C3 service commercial to the M1 light industrial zone with the development agreement that finds specific uses from C3 land use table that are compatible with the M1 zone for the purpose of maximizing allowed permitted development opportunities. The subject property lies in the ATO-2 noise abatement zone related to the airport. And before I get to staff, I'd like to note that I received an exhibit with the proposed zones or allowed uses for the Eisenberg rezone, which I've marked exactly, exhibit ZON 21-2.1. And the staff will referred to this, in their presentation. With that, I would ask the staff to go ahead and make the presentation on this case, please.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Will you repeat the exhibit number that you indicated?
Yeah, exhibit CON 21-2.1.
Okay, I thought that's what I heard, that it was
You
like,
didn't believe it,
I didn't believe my head.
okay.
Okay, thank you. Route, Senior Planner, 621 Cleveland Boulevard, and I have been sworn. Again, thank you for your consideration of this application tonight, Mr. Hearing Examiner. We are here to consider amending the comprehensive plan map from commercial and service to manufacturing and production, and then rezone if that's approved, then rezone the property from C3 service commercial to M1 light industrial with a development agreement that provides for the modification of the land use table and for the application of conditions to the property to ensure that we meet some aesthetic and landscaping standards along our entrance corridor at this property along Highway 2026. The property has been an agricultural field for the most of its existence there, and has been marketed to through various channels and things over the years to be developed. It has some constraints, one being that it is on the entrance corridor of Highway 2026. The access management plan restricts access to the property, or limits it. It does have access to the frontage, but it's limited to just 2 access points, and then those access points are likely will be restricted to right in, right out, and possibly even only right in at one of those access points. And then it would also, the property would have a primary access point onto Smead Parkway as well. The other constraint on this property for the purposes of commercial and industrial uses is that there is a transmission line that bisects the property, cutting it into a couple of pieces whereby there can't be development underneath that power line, and I think the easement is 50 feet on each side of that transmission line. So it restricts the uses or the potential development and uses of that property. It is 17 acres. There will be an additional amount of right-of-way that is going to be required on that property for the widening project and the turn lanes that would be required to as development occurs here. And so, you know, is it really 17 acres? Is it 15 acres? You know, with the transmission line in there, now are we at 12 acres of buildable land on there, which then starts to kind of dictate how people might use that property to develop. And so it hasn't been as attractive to developers as some of the other parcels that are not bisected by this transmission line and challenged by that development standard. So in that, the applicant has requested, you know, staff to consider a comprehensive plan map amendment and a rezone to light industrial, which would allow or broaden the opportunity of uses on the property. Not only that, they then asked as well to not only open up the opportunities for potentially M1 or light industrial, and to be able to market it as light industrial, which is seemingly more appealing to the development community, because, again, the industrial uses tend to allow for a little different or more intense use and development of the property. The staff and the applicant have gone over the land use matrix and a number of times at this point, and then we've gone through several iterations and came back to what made sense. The list that I provided to the hearing examiner tonight, the applicant had not seen either as well. I mean, they got it the same time that Mr. Hearing Examiner, that you received it. So if we run through the staff report, this property does lie within the APO2 noise limitation zone, so a navigation easement is required for any structures on the property, and will be required in order to build structures there. The uses surrounding the properties are currently industrial and commercial. There are a mix of uses, similar to what is being requested by the applicant themselves. The property to the south of this property is actually zoned M1 industrial, light industrial. The property to the west is has a strip of commercial frontage, and then the balance of that property is also zoned M1 light industrial, and has been platted with several industrial development lots and some commercial lots out on the frontage. The proposal that has come in is that that's potentially going to be a trucking facility, so it will be fairly industrial altogether on there. With that said, that is one use that we've requested through the land use table, ZON 21-2.1, that this not be a trucking facility, a trucking terminal, something of that use. We prefer that the frontage doesn't become just one big trucking center, that, with Flying J further to the west as well. The properties to the east of this development parcel include the MRI testing center, a kidney and dialysis center, the Department of Labor. There are multifamily units further to the east. The Thomas Jefferson Charter School is located in that small development to the east of this property as well. And so there is a good mix of residential and commercial and industrial in this area. The comprehensive plan actually supports the use of this property as light industrial, and as conditioned to address the community design and the aesthetic features, and ensuring that we don't have a wall of buildings lined up against the highway out there, that, from an aesthetic standpoint. The power line also creates a natural division of any structure that may be built there. It cannot build underneath that power line, that transmission line at all. And so, again, the comprehensive plan, I believe the goals and policies as conditions, that this application is consistent with the, code for that. I would like you to take a look at, the ZON 21-2.1, and as indicated, the applicant had not had an opportunity to review my revised, revision of their proposed uses. And, they've asked that in this section, the second section, under the black bar, that the industrial park, manufacturing general, and processing general be permitted uses as they are permitted in the M1 zone. The intent there, those titles are quite broad. What does that mean? So if someone came in and built a nice flex building there, and you had a tenant come in and say they wanted to manufacture fishing reels in their 1,000 square feet, is that manufacturing general, and does that have to be approved, you know? And so there may be some unintended consequence of restricting the use in a way that doesn't match. Why would we want to rezone it to M1 if we're going to limit that use in that way? And so, although I have some concerns, like, can we get an incompatible use there by lifting that restriction? I also think that they have a valid concern in that the site is restricted on its own in the size of the buildings and the type of buildings that can be there. So are we further restricting or adding a piece to the process that may have the tenant back off and not want to locate there because at discretion of the director, they could not be allowed to utilize that space for that purpose. I think it's a valid concern. It would be my guess. Because we may know how Jerome sees, Mr. Mapp, the director, views what we're intending with this development agreement, but the next director may not have that same view. And I think that given the restrictions and the constraints of the property, that it is appropriate to modify those to be Ps instead of director decisions. And the other two that we want to look at was distribution center and warehouse and storage. So again, flex type space, flex type buildings, the probability of them being used for those purposes is high, and it's discretionary as to what's a distribution center, what is warehouse. Warehouse and storage is intended in the industrial zone, and it's probably the most realistic use of that space. And so I think that probably should be supported to be a P as well, not add an additional review process there. There will be reviews at the time of the building permits being submitted and or subdivision development if that occurs as well. And so we'll have opportunity to review those applications as they come forward through that process. And I will stand for questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Ruth. I do have a number of questions. First of all, let's address the comprehensive plan. I think that's, the recommendation is good on that. It seems very suitable for the light manufacturing comprehensive plan designation. But there's one question that comes up in all these kinds of transitions from commercial to something else. Are we serving the commercial sector by taking away the commercial designation of land use? Is that an overriding concern? Because I ask this with similar cases. This is something we have to keep an eye on, that we don't plan ourselves out of commercial zoning. How do you feel about that?
Right. So, I believe, there is that concern that we wouldn't have commercial uses here. Again, with the access restrictions and the constraints on the property, I feel like this property is limiting from a commercial standpoint. But what I also believe is that by taking this through the development agreement process and going through the land use table and actually allowing for many of the commercial uses, matter of fact, almost all of the commercial uses that are available in the C3 zone as well, that we've really actually broadened the possibilities, and in doing that also, there have been concessions where uses that would normally be allowed in an industrial zone that are considered more of a heavy industrial or more compatible with a heavy industrial zone have been removed from the opportunity on this property. And so it really has forced kind of towards a true light industrial, small manufacturing, commercial opportunity on this property, for flex space, for development of a multitude of things that could serve the community and put this property to use.
Thank you, Ms. Ruth. Ms. McDonald, this has several issues with ingress, egress. What are your thoughts on the overall site ingress, egress, and how that it's going to look?
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Rob McDonald, 621 Cleveland Boulevard. I had them this morning. We have reviewed the access for this site. In fact, we had a traffic impact study conducted so that the access could be evaluated. And what we have determined is that there is not, this site does not pose any significant traffic impacts to this area. The majority of the access will take place off of two main streets. One of those would be Smead Parkway and the other would be 2026. The 2026 access is permitted as long as ITD is willing to honor whatever permit was issued, and I believe the applicant had indicated at one point that they had a permit from ITD for a right-in, right-out access point. And I may be mistaken, the applicant can correct me if I'm wrong. So an access point on 2026, and then also they will have their primary full access will be on Smead Parkway, which is across the street from Enterprise Way, and we feel is acceptable.
And Mr. McDonald, this would be able to serve both commercial and industrial kinds of uses?
Yes, it should be able to serve, either type of use that's presented.
And, it looks like, one access per, frontage, is that what you're talking about?
That is my understanding. I'm not sure if there were actually two access points on 2026. I'll let the applicant speak to that. The traffic impact study analyzed one access, so if they had a second, then that would just make the situation, that much better.
Okay, yeah, that, addresses issues with the comprehensive plan designation, whether it's suitable for commercial and or industrial. Mr. Rick, let's back up just a little bit on the sort of the overall vision for this property and why we're looking at this type of process. Is the city's greatest concern really the public interface, the look and feel of the uses here as far as blending in with the neighborhood? What is the approach of having this kind of broad development agreement with the types of uses you presented? Is it aesthetic, is it land use, is it both?
Yeah, so, Mr. Hearing Examiner, thank you. The property has essentially sat fallow or undeveloped, for a long period of time. The city definitely has concerns regarding the aesthetic view of the property or to the traveling public, along this corridor, and there's conditions placed for the landscaping. The ordinance has a 30-foot landscape buffer that's required, with specific landscaping requirements, and then the, application is conditioned to also, ensure that we, are kind of keeping the integrity of the property to a somewhat of a commercial look and feel, or at least not backing an industrial look building, a solid wall up to the highway, and not having some aesthetic appeal to that, and in keeping with this. There's a mixed desire, whether city council or economic development, depends on who you're talking to, as to what uses are most appropriate along this corridor. And again, there's a mix of uses on the corridor. The property is just constrained in a way that we're trying to work with the property owner to allow for some flexibility in getting the property developed, but developed in a way that is visually and commercially appealing to businesses that would like to utilize any space that's built on this property. And with that, currently we just recently broke ground for about 100,000 square foot D&B supply store to be built across the road in North Ranch. That's commercial, but it's big, right? And they're building into a space that can manage that and handle that. There's the likelihood of when you start to bring in some kind of anchor type locations like that you continue to attract more commercial element to it, and we want to make sure that we're not restricting that potential on this site.
Yeah, I think that's true. I'm just kind of struggling with this, the kinds of uses recommended, it just seems like, you know, we need a mixed zone or something that might simplify this. And I'm not against having, you know, this detailed complexity in the development agreement. I think it helps to achieve that, which you're doing kind of a commercial / light industrial zone here, which I think is admirable and probably what we see and will see, in the neighborhood here. So, clarify your comments in your testimony about, you said that somebody's designated as the director, possibility of director approval, as opposed to, as a special use permit or some other mechanism. Are you advocating for them all to be a special use permit, or are you okay with having one type of approval process and some of the other type of approval process?
Right. So what I'm advocating for is that on ZON 21-2.1, that the elements in M1 that are, and this is considering that if we were to change the zone to M1, so that column, M1, what I'm advocating for is that those uses on the top of that table that are identified to require a special use permit would, in fact, require a special use permit. And that 5 of those uses that are currently identified to have a director review, that 5 of those uses, industrial park, manufacturing general, processing general, distribution center, warehouse, and storage, be just permitted uses as they would be in the M1 zone today. But that the other uses that are in that category there, that they be director decisions, just for a design review process. And then the uses in the third segment of the table, those are uses that are currently permitted in the zone and or have been modified from requiring a special use to just being permitted, and or those that say in A with a strikeout, those uses were not allowed in the industrial zone, are not currently allowed in the industrial zone in the land use table, that they would be then permitted in this zone under this development agreement. They would be uses that could be considered permitted in the M1 zone, which that's where all of those uses would be considered for occupancy in any one building, a standalone building, or in a flex building at that point. And so the ordinance currently allows for certain C3 uses to be considered to be allowed in the M1 industrial zone. They're already considered somewhat compatible. All of those uses that have a 3, a footnote or a note 3 on them, those uses had already been identified as uses that were, pretty consistently compatible with the M1 zone. By then taking the fourth section of this exhibit has several pages of three full pages of uses that have been struck. They would not be allowed to be on this property, even though they might be permitted in the M1 zone. And, they've been struck for a number of reasons, so residential, we don't want residential in the zone. It is a, APO2 zone, and so a land use limitation zone for the Caldwell Municipal Airport. There are more heavy industrial type uses that we also struck from the use so that we could help to ensure compatibility of this mix of, service, commercial, and industrial together in a flex space. So that's what the table is trying to, allow for a lot of flexibility on the property and still provide compatibility, and also meet what the city is anticipating to be in this location along this corridor.
Okay, thinking this through, did you run the 5, exclusion in industrial park, manufacturing, general, processing, what were the other 2?
Distribution center, warehouse, and storage.
Okay, and so you think that would be better as just a permitted P, and, take the DIR off of that?
Yeah, I think that's really consistent with much of the flex space throughout our business park and the industrial park. It's just the flex space, even the flex space that's across the road, to the northeast, that flex space has consistently been kind of utilized by different, businesses, and, warehousing, storage are part of those, you know, in a smaller way, but, it's, you know, there's such a mix of people or business types and uses, and the type of use that they need to have in that space is, if we were to limit that warehouse and storage or the distribution part of that, we could limit how flexible that space could be.
I'm taking this route now. Let's move on to, you have essentially a set of design guidelines here that I think help ameliorate some of the uses that we're talking about, introduced on page 4 of your staff report. And also conditions of approval. I think this approach to design solves some of the problems as far as, you know, giving the kind of look and feel, or most of the problems for that matter. And I think the combination of the so-called project design criteria here, A through U in your list, are appropriate. We have, well, it's a different, just the same listing condition, 15.11, it's just labeled differently. So I think it's a worthy inclusion for the condition of approval, and would help to ameliorate some of the issues that how something is going to look. A question from Mr. Mann, please.
Mr. Examiner Jerome Knapp, Planning Director, 621 Cleveland Boulevard, and I've been sworn in. One of the design features that Deb and I talked about is relating to parking lots. Having that front corridor being a complete parking lot would concern me. Prefer the building to the front, structure, of course. And, as mentioned here is the screen, the landscaping. It would also, reduce the intensity in regards to the type of structures. So it's important, from my point of view as a director, is that we have a major corridor going through Caldwell. Aesthetically, that could either support what we wanted regarding landscaping, regarding, visual impacts, or it can be a detriment if it's not done correctly. So I just want to bring that to your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mapp, I agree entirely. Now, again, I'm looking at the exhibit table on page 4, and then the condition 1511. They seem to be a little bit different. Is that the same list, or am I missing something here? About 4 of them have been taken off of the list on page 4.
Mr. Hearing Examiner, the report was not put together in as timely a manner as I could have put it together. And so, as I was trying to combine a couple of lists that had, multiple, like they had the same things in them, I could have missed or added, things in there. It was really intended to create one list, and so there may actually be, multiple, like duplicates. I'm not sure on that. It should be the same list, but there could be duplicates in one that's not in the other.
Yeah, the condition seems about 4 short. Okay, I just want to clear that up. And just, I think we asked this question, that the discussion included the consideration of having C3 uses exclusively in the first 300 foot of depth, and manufacturing in the remainder of the parcel. You pointed out it's only 600 feet deep, which really further limits any kind of coherent design. And so I just wanted to ask you the idea that, like the neighboring property, the C3 up front is off the table.
Is the C3 off the table?
Yeah.
I think by cutting this property into putting C3 and M1, it produces some limitation that, I'm not sure that we're, gaining. Say they wanted to, I don't know, put a building, a flex building running north-south on that property, on the west side of the property, to better, maybe even put an L-shaped building on the property, and to work with the power line being there. Portion of the building would be in C3 and a portion in M1, and then how do you determine what uses are where? I mean, I think it creates additional, concerns or, can the building be in multiple zones, or, that kind of thing. And so I'm not sure it serves us well to do that. I think there's ways to do that, maybe only commercial uses could be in the, first 300 feet, but again, I don't think that serves us well in this case.
Thank you, Ms. Rubin. That concludes my questions for staff, and I'd like to have the applicant, make their presentation, please, and, we'll continue this discussion after that.
Mr. Hearing Examiner,
Oh.
could I clarify one thing? So the list on page 4 included things like signage and some landscaping things that are addressed in separate conditions.
Okay,
And that's probably why that list is different.
well, that clears that up, thank you very much. And, Mr. Dansfer?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Please.
My name is Jason Densmer with the Land Group. My address is 462 East Shore Drive in Eagle. I'm here tonight representing, I have been sworn. Thank you. Thanks for the visual reminder. I'm here representing the property owner, which is BBPI LLC, and also Craig Eisenberg with Eisenberg Companies. Just as a bit of history, Craig and his company bought this property about 15 years ago. He's a national developer of commercial properties, primarily retail, but also industrial and other things. His business for some 50 years is developing projects across the United States, the South and West, including other projects here in the Treasure Valley. So when he bought the property some 15 years ago, he had the intention of bringing a commercial shopping center to the property. And has marketed it that way for a long time, but has been unable to get a tenant interested to build there. Meanwhile, Caldwell has grown, and much of the area around the property has been redesignated in the city from other commercial uses to light industrial, and is now developing in a lot of ways like staff indicated with the D&B project, in ways that are kind of quasi-commercial or quasi-industrial. I think maybe to your observation that they're really much more of a mixed designation. I think that's really aligned with the intent of our application tonight. So knowing that commercial has been a struggle here, but meanwhile light industrial has really been what the market needs from this area of Caldwell. We're trying to align the uses of the property with those opportunities that exist, but without limiting the city to be able to provide services to the neighborhoods around. So, I think we appreciate all of the work staff has done and working with us to understand what it was we were proposing, which is really a blending of the opportunities that have existed for 15 years under the C3 zone with new opportunities in the M1 that others around are taking advantage of, and that also would be appropriate here. So with that, we, like I said, appreciate all the work the staff has done and support the staff report as it's written, particularly in view of the numerous constraints that have been described in terms of access, the power transmission lines, et cetera. I think having the broadest selection of available uses will really help this project, or this property, to become developed and become an asset to the city. With regard to your question earlier about is C3 still on the table, or would it be appropriate to impose a requirement that properties close to the 2026 frontage develop with commercial uses? I think that, from our perspective, would kind of be a killer. We already have described all of the challenges and constraints the property suffers from already. To just impose another artificial line east to west across the property would certainly not help the cause. Whereas I think that what we have proposed with the M1 zone and the specific land use table, limited by a development agreement for the aesthetic considerations that are important to the city and are important to the landowner as well, along this important corridor, really can achieve what the city and the property owner both need. So I think, I know it got a little bit complicated with your discussion about the land use table, but we are in support of the staff's recommendation, which identifies particular land uses in the M1 zone that would still require a special use permit, and then a list of others that are permitted outright, and then a small selection of uses that require director approval, with those 5 that we've talked about. industrial park, manufacturing general, processing general, distribution center, and warehouse, being moved from the director approval category to the outright approved category. Probably a mess of that, but generally we're, in agreement with staff's recommendation as we described it. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Danforth. We pretty well addressed the issues, the big overarching issue here is the development agreement and the kinds of uses that, the city would like to see there. And you've indicated that, your applicant is, in agreement with that approach to development.
That's correct.
Okay, and my understanding, and, you know, maybe the staff would concur, but, you know, we're just trying to get a good looking entryway into the city here, regardless of the type of use. And from your professional standpoint, do you think this approach with design guidelines and this mix of uses, do you think that achieves that goal?
Mr. Higgins, I do. I think that the conditions of approval that have been recommended by staff will ensure the aesthetic goals and kind of the overall appeal of the corridor is maintained, irregardless of what particular uses are placed on the property.
And just for my own edification, is this kind of mix, is this hard to sell? You know, I'm not on the sale end of any of this, you know, in your position where you're working with people trying to make some money off of this. Is this, you know, for future reference in this corridor or other places, do you think this is a reasonable approach to get good, sound, long-term development?
I do. Craig would probably be the right person to talk about how difficult it is to sell. I'm happy to if you want. If you'd like to hear from him on the marketing side.
Sure, I'm just curious, it doesn't have a, you know, overall bearing on, you know, the form of the ordinance, but if we're barking up the right tree, that's what I want to know, to get good development, good industrial development, good commercial development, and a gateway to the city, you know, be really useful for us to understand that.
Well, with that question in mind, I do think the ordinance achieves what you're going for. I think it's broad enough to enable a mixture of uses, knowing that the markets do shift over time and that uses inside of flex buildings, for example, do shift over time. I think the city also recognizes that there is a lot of compatibility between the M1 and C3 zones. And you can just see that from how many uses are aligned or exist in both of those zones already. So I think, you know, if you were to look at your zoning ordinance and the table of uses, there might be opportunities to increase particular uses or clarify what particular uses are available. But for the most part, I think that you're achieving your aims.
Thank you. I suppose what would be best at this point would be have a sold project as you walk in the door, be able to go up or down on the site plan and the uses. Lacking that, you know, we're still, you know, under a big tent of uses and approaches to this. Do you have are there clients, are you approaching a site plan? I mean, you're not to that point yet?
I think there have been a number of site plans proposed, but they're all dependent on what users choose to show up to the site. And that's really one of the reasons that maintaining as broad of flexibility as is appropriate is important, because it is difficult to predict what eventual users will arrive, particularly for a project that might build out in phases. The first user that arrives may change the selection of the future tenants that would be interested in the balance of the property. For example, if the first building is a manufacturing or warehouse distribution use, which is probable based on many of the buildings that are developing in the area, then a sandwich shop or a delicatessen might be an appropriate small use for a portion of the property that's constrained by some of the, limitations that we've described. So it's, as you can imagine, the fabric of the city develops over time, and it's difficult to know which direction it will go, but ultimately we want to govern it in such a way that the land uses remain compatible over a long period of time.
I think that, Jennifer, one question I meant to ask staff, but I asked you, what the setbacks look like on that power corridor? What kind of setbacks are you experiencing on that?
I believe staff said that the easement is 50 feet from center line, and although I didn't look it up before I came, that does sound correct to me.
Yeah, it's a pretty good chunk
Yes, it's quite a
out of
ways
the
long.
property. How are you dealing with that?
Because of the limitations on building placement, all of the site plans that are being contemplated would position buildings away from that. And I think the most probable solution under the power line is either that it be used for parking or for yard storage, some kind of fenced enclosure subject to design review standards.
Thank you, Mr. Danfer. I have no further questions. And there's no one else trying to speak. Would your client wish to speak?
If you have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them.
I think I've got the questions answered that I wanted. And with that, I thank you for your testimony, and I'll go back to staff, and we'll have a little bit more discussion. And thank you. I think we've pretty well examined this. We need to, with your recommended changes to the exhibit zone 21, 2.1, are there any other issues that you or the other staff members concerns you have with this before I close the testimony?
No, sir, I do not have anything.
Thank you. With that, I'll close the public testimony and move to the evaluation stage. We have two applications: comprehensive plan designation, land use map designation change, and make a motion on that. I'm not finding it. The recommendation for the comprehensive plan.
Page 6, it starts. And then on page 8, the findings of fact, including the law.
Right, thank you. That's what I was looking for. Section 6, findings of fact for case DMP 21-1, the comprehensive plan map amendment. The Caldwell hearing, the Caldwell hearing examiner accepts the facts outlining the staff report, public testimony, and the evidence list. All adopted city ordinances, standards, and codes were used in evaluating the application. Conclusions of law, section 7, comprehensive plan map amendment. The Caldwell hearing examiner has the authority to hear this case and recommend to the city council that it be approved or denied. The public notice requirements are met. The hearing was legally noticed and posted, and the hearing was held and conducted under the requirements of Idaho Code of City Ordinances. The recommendation for the comprehensive plan map amendment Based on the findings and facts and conclusions of law, the Caldwell hearing examiner hereby recommends to the mayor and city council the case number CMP 21-1, request to modify the 2040 comprehensive plan designation from commercial and services to manufacturing and production for parcel R35307, containing approximately 17.61 acres for the purpose of changing the zoning designation from C3 service commercial to M1 light industrial to provide for flexibility in development of the constrained property is approved with the following conditions. And the conditions shown on page 9 of the staff report, 8.2 and 8.3 are the conditions that I recommend the mayor and city council. With that, moving on to the proposed rezone, looking at page 11 of the staff report, the finding of facts for the rezone ZON 21-2, the Eisenberg rezone. The Caldwell hearing examiner accepts the facts outlined in the staff report, public testimony in the evidence list, all adopted city ordinances, standards, and codes were used in evaluating the application. Conclusions of law for the rezone. The Caldwell hearing examiner has the authority to hear this case and recommend to the Caldwell City Council that it be approved or denied. The public notice requirements were met. The hearing was legally noticed and posted, and the hearing was held and conducted under the requirements of Idaho Code and city ordinances. Section 8, recommendation for the rezone. Based on the findings of facts and conclusions of law, the Caldwell hearing examiner hereby recommends to the mayor and city council that case number ZON 21-2, request to rezone parcel 35307 containing approximately 17.61 acres from C3 service commercial to M1 light industrial, providing for flexibility in development of the constrained property, subject to a development agreement, is approved with the following conditions. In the staff report, the conditions to which I refer are on page 12 and 13 and numbered 15.1 through 15.13. And under 15.13, I'll enter in as the listed uses allowed, director decision special use permit for the Eisenberg rezone development agreement, and labeled as exhibit ZON 21-2.1, the use table crafted from the zoning code use table with the following revisions to that exhibit. On page 1 of the exhibit, the uses listed: industrial park, manufacturing, general, processing general. On page 2, distribution center and warehouse and storage. Now the designations changed from DIR to P for permitted. And in the first column on that table, the DIR will be removed for those 5 items. Those 5 items will have the designation of P for permitted. Those are the only changes to this table, but the table in whole will comprise recommendation or condition 15.13. In addition to that, I'm going to add to condition 15.11 above. There should be item R on the recommendation of the planning director that it's recommended that the street front parking should be discouraged, and properties should be encouraged to have parking off the street in the rear of the structure, with the fronts of the buildings towards the street, to improve the look in the entryway in what I consider, a gateway or a quasi-gateway, corridor into the city. And, with that, I will, close this hearing and send that recommendation on to Mayor and City Council. And thank you for your testimony. Good luck. Thank you. And moving on to the last action item for the evening, have before us case number SUP 21-18, a request by Design West Architects on behalf of the City of Caldwell for special use permit to construct a new Parks and Recreation office and maintenance building on the current site of the existing facilities at 618 Irving Street, Caldwell, Idaho. The existing office and maintenance buildings will be removed and are repurposed for city use at this location. With that, I would ask the staff to make their presentation on this application.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Alex Jones, Associate Planner, 621 Cleveland Boulevard, and I've been sworn in. So here today we have the Parks and Rec building. The purpose of the new facility is to accommodate the growing needs of the city, address accessibility issues, and update outdated existing facilities. Design West Architects, in collaboration with their various engineering consultants, the City Parks, Recreation Department, City Engineering Department, and the City Finance Department have designed a new park and recreation office building and maintenance shop. For this new office building, it will include 8 offices, a public reception area with kiosk for program enrollment, staff locker rooms, a staff training room / break room, a conference room, athletic storage, and other service spaces. This office is approximately 4,900 square feet. The new shop building will include a fabrication bay, 2 standard vehicle maintenance bays, and a pull-through maintenance bay with vehicle washing equipment, and this building is around 4,000 square feet. The zone is R2 with, to the north, it is the city park, south is baseball field and social security office, to the east is residential, and to the west is residential / city park. The subject property has access onto Irving Street, a local roadway, and no new access points are proposed with this application. Engineering had to say that the street will need full frontage, half street improvements shall be completed along Irving Street. Applicant shall remove and replace all dilapidated, broken, failing curb and gutter. Applicant shall remove the continuous valley gutter along the frontage and provide individual access points that comply with city standards. For water, all on-site water mains will need to be looped into existing mains for fire flow and water quality purposes. Internal main sizing and construction plan approval will be dependent upon the availability of fire flow. And each building shall be supplied with its own potable water service. Engineering also had to say for the sanitary sewer, each building shall be supplied with its own sanitary sewer services, and that for storm drains, provision shall be made for the disposal of stormwater drainage in accordance with the city stormwater management manual and any updates adopted subsequent to this application. A copy of this policy is available on the city's website. The engineer of record has provided calculations which indicate the assumptions in his stormwater drainage plan comply with the requirements of the stormwater manual. The other public service utilities had no other memorandums at this point. For parking, they were required to have 12 spots. They have provided 13. Their maintenance bay required 4 spots. They have also provided 4. And the director had requirements for landscaping, which is under Exhibit A-8.1. And I am open to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. you know how long this facility has been on the site?
I do not.
50 years.
50 years? Sir, we'll wait for your testimony, please. And, direct questions to me. Do you know if that's been in the ownership of the city's owned that for the 50 years? Okay. Mr. Jones, in the zoning code, you see that the land use schedule, section 100202, that, in the R2 zone, the public facilities is allowed as a special use permit, is that correct?
Yes, yes it is.
Okay.
That's why we have this meeting right now.
I just wanted to establish that, the use has been there 50 years, it's allowed in the zone, through this process of a special use permit. Let's see, look at, there are residential uses in the area. Do you know how close the nearest residence is to this proposed structure?
Do we have the vicinity map? No.
I can pull it up here.
Maybe 50 feet.
Yeah, it's right across the street, and I believe those are apartments.
Okay, those are residences along the street there. Okay. And in the proposed building, you said there's a fabrication bay, may include construction, metal bending, this kind of thing. Do you know if the structure is designed for noise abatement, acoustical treatments, to prevent noises outside the building?
I believe that would be a question better suited for the applicant or the city engineer.
Mr. McDonald, there've been accommodations for sound deadening, for these activities inside the building?
Yeah, it's an enclosed envelope, right? Mr. Hearing Examiner, Rob McDonald, 621 Cleveland Boulevard, and I have been this morning.
Thank you.
I represent the city for this project. The existing facility has been there for some time, as you know, and is dilapidated and has many issues that are out of compliance with current code standards. City Council has directed staff to pursue a new building and shop at this location. To answer your question, what you have here, let me see if this will work.
Not too far away.
There we go. So what you have here is, in the front, you have two different structures. The front structure is an office, that will have the office spaces for the parks and recreation employees, a break room, an entryway, a reception area, and then some lockers and some restrooms and a place, training room. And then in the back you have the enclosed shop. The shop is a conditioned area, which means that it has to meet energy codes, which means that the walls will all be insulated, and it'll be a system that is much more insulated than the existing shop, which is right over here, likely. It is the intent that once these two structures are constructed, that the existing shop and the existing office, which is up here on the front, would be, demolished and removed, and the site would be, at that time, beautified on the frontage and, with the additional, shop, or I should say parking area accommodated there. Does that answer your question about the shop?
Well, I just, wondering about any kind of noise abatement, that would, lessen the noise offsite.
Yeah, it'll be an insulated shop, so that will be a noise abatement in and of itself. Beyond that, there's no additional plans to put any other type of significant noise abatement measures there. Generally, there's not a lot of loud noise coming out of the shop. This isn't a shop where they're typically doing a lot of fabricating or things like that. It's more of a shop where they pull a lawnmower in and they're changing the oil, or other uses like that. There may be some fabrication, but that's probably a little more infrequent.
And, Mr. McDonald, is there, hours of operation, is that normal business hours, or how's the operation of that run?
So the hours of operation are the normal business hours for the Parks and Rec, and typically, in the summertime, they may, be meeting on site. It could possibly be as early as 6 o'clock, where they meet up and they go through their routes and they have their combined meeting, and then usually around 7 o'clock, they may be heading out to their sites to maintain the parks.
Mr. McDonald's at largely a 5-day work week. They operate on the weekends.
Yes, 5 days.
Thank you. That concludes my questions. If you had more testimony, I'd love to hear it.
I do not have anything else to add, except that I will mention, that we have been working very closely with the architects, Design West, and the contractors, Benetton, to put together a building that is much more aesthetically pleasing than what is currently existing there. We felt like this was a good location to continue to house the Parks and Recreation, which is why we didn't opt to find some other location in the city. And because it fronts, Memorial Park, which is, one of the oldest parks in the city, we wanted to make sure it looks really nice, and that it's something that, is kind of a capstone to the park for access to the recreation activities and things like that in the city. So, that's all I have to add. If you don't have any further questions, then I guess that concludes.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Appreciate your testimony. I have no further questions of staff. We have, Mr. Alan Wolf, wish to testify, please.
My name's Alan Wolf, live at 1122 Painter, and I have been sworn in.
Thank you.
Okay, when I received this from the Planning and Zoning Department, I looked at it and it says the subject property. And that's a piece of ground that's 400 feet by 600 feet. Now, I realize that your diagram of the building there is just the corner of it. But my question is the subject property liable to ever be used as maintenance and or any other use besides the park that it is right now? Because the maintenance department has expanded their footprint. They've taken out a badminton or volleyball court on one side and added that to the maintenance department. As far as the noise is concerned, I've been in lot number 11 right there on your sheet, on this sheet that they sent out since 1956. So I have watched what's happened in the park area. As for how far away from residents the proposed building is gonna be, it's about 50 feet. That was my ex-wife's uncle's house. It's gonna be the, closest one to that building. I do know how far away it is, I think that besides limiting this subject property to park use only, not maintenance, not parking lots, not new supersonic, solar panel field, limit it just to a park. That should be addressed at this time, so they don't send out something that's 400 by 600 feet. Also, it is a maintenance building, so there is gonna be some pollution involved. You know, you're gonna have oil and gas and everything else that's gonna be available there. And the subsurface water is already a problem in that area. It's only like a 6 foot down to the water. We're already having a problem with the new design for the swimming pool. They haven't figured out if they just lift the swimming pool up and build it up on a mound, they could get away from the surface water. Which is another question that's been, you know, another impact that the Parks and Recreation Department have been dealing with for the last year and a half, and haven't come to any resolution as far as I can see. My question is why is this project being done now when there is no competitive construction firms out there? They're all very non-competitive with the way the building and everything is going on now. They're not doing it for an honest way. They're looking to kill a fat goose right now. There is no competitive bidding that's going on right now. City of Caldwell's gonna pay top dollar. Now, if you got any questions for me, why I'm opposed to it, or why I'm making these statements, I'm willing to take those. Now, maybe you could give me some answers to the questions that I have.
Okay, that concludes your testimony. I have a few comments, but I would like to know, do the residents there in your building suffer from noise and noxious or toxic substances? Has that been a problem?
No, not at this present time, you know. Sometimes in the morning when the garbage trucks come there, they can bang those garbage cans around quite a bit. But other than that, the Parks and Recreation Department do a very nice job taking care of the parks. You know, I've got no problem with the facilities that are there right now. They, you know, they're courteous, do their best with what they have. They cut down too many trees, but as far as noise and everything, it's all right. You know, it's not annoying. Now, not the closest one to the west. Now, as far as the people on the east side and those houses that are along the road there, right next to the building, I'm not sure how they make more noise in the apartments than the maintenance building. They like to squeal their tires. They're young people, most of them. Most of the houses in the park, the subsurface water there, it's 6 feet down approximately, goes from east to west. And most of the houses that have basements or something to the west of it, have sump pumps. And so far it hasn't happened that I've noticed that there's been pollution in the sump pump water. I haven't noticed any gasoline smell or anything like that, but it is a possibility if it got a smell or something.
Thank you. As far as your question about the, the subject property, the zoning does allow for this to be developed as a public facility. That's a fairly broad, definition in the zoning code, as are most definitions. But the answer is that if there were further development of this property, it would be subject to a hearing of this nature and in public review and with, if there were objections that go to the city council, on appeal. So that goes for anything that would happen on this property.
There was no city council meeting when they took in the soccer field, plowed it up, and there was no city debate when they put in the 8-foot fence that goes around that end of the property. Not only just an 8-foot fence, not just a barrier, but a sight barrier also. It's a lattice fence that you can't see through, and it looks like a blank wall in that part of the park. So I've really got not much faith in what the planning and zoning committee does in this county, in this city. I mean, planning looks like they use a shotgun for figuring out what they're gonna do. So I really don't have much faith unless somebody can come up and just say absolutely that they're not gonna take the 2 baseball fields that are there. Because that's what the subject property would do, would obliterate that whole corner. And then we'd be pinched in between an industrial zone with a maintenance yard and a maintenance facility and the residential area. And we don't need to be in a industrial zone, even if it is park property.
Yeah, I think, those kind of questions would have to go to the Parks Department, because it's not a part of this, current application. But the application before us is just, the buildings that, we've been shown in the staff presentation.
This thing came out with that subject property on it, so that must be part of the situation right now. The subject property would tell me that they have designs, or they could have designs to do something different. So that should be part of this discussion.
This proceeding only addresses those buildings, the one they're taking down and one they're putting up. That's the extent of it.
Why is the subject property on it?
Well, it's part of the legal application process that you have to, I mean, we're dealing with the parcel here, and the parcel, as a whole may not be involved, in this particular case. It's just dealing with this one building. And in fact, it's what you see is what you get here.
Is there an architect's drawing?
Well, yeah, it's part of the application,
Why wasn't that presented here today? Why wasn't that presented here today?
Oh, it was.
No, they don't show an artist's drawing of what it's supposed to look like. I have not seen that.
We have site plans.
We have a site plan, but we have no artist rendition.
That's probably true.
On drive or something?
Yeah, apparently we do have one available here.
Mr. Hearing Examiner, if I may, kind of further clarify the subject property. So as Mr. Hearing Examiner alluded to, it is about a parcel, and so the map that was sent out to property owners within 300 feet of the actual parcel, and so the city, those maintenance buildings that will be constructed on a much larger parcel, which does include those baseball fields and part of the park and those things. And so when that map is created, that's attached to that notice to you, it's created for the property that those buildings are going to sit on, which is a much larger parcel, and that all of the neighbors within 300 feet of the exterior boundaries of that subject property, so the whole parcel, including the baseball field, are notified in that process by statute.
Is there any way in this meeting to establish that the remainder of that parcel not be used for a maintenance yard or any other thing besides park, grass, baseball fields, some kind of a, you know, a park,
So, the application is, you know, just for that piece, and that, by logic, you exclude all the other parts of it. You know, we're just looking at this one piece, and that's all. And so they can't come in, you know, through the back door or whatever, and add to it. We're just looking at this one piece, and that's all the approval covers, is what you're seeing on the screen here. And,
so any of the other parcel could be used for anything else they want to do.
well, with the hearing like this, and the proper application.
They don't have hearings when they do their changes. They just go out there.
Well, we're in a hearing now, sir.
We're doing that because they have to build a building. We're doing that because they have to have a building permit. They have to have inspectors and everything else coming in. That's the only reason that I can see that they're making an exception in this case, because they took the other parts of that parcel without having any hearings.
Well, I think these are issues that you would want to talk to with the Parks Department.
Parks Department can't even buy garbage cans to replace the ones that aren't there.
That's not relevant to the discussion. You know, all I can say is all we're talking about is the building you're looking at, in total, and that's all the approval is, and there ain't no more.
Well, I can't say that, I can't disapprove the building, because the building would be a new building. What was there before was a cavalry barn. It was a useful building. And quite possibly this would be a beneficial addition to have a new maintenance building, or a new office building. I'm sure that everybody wants their office on the corner with windows. They already built a new building down on the other end across from the swimming pool. And, it looks like it's being used for a gymnasium. I'm not sure what it's being used for. That took up part of the park. They paved over where the old horseshoe pins were, horseshoe rings. That's all been concreted over. Parking lot behind the swimming pool has been concreted over.
Well, sir, we're just gonna look at this one application here.
Well.
But I do appreciate your testimony.
Okay, just, I don't wanna see any more of the park lost. And as far as the building that's gonna be put in there, as long as the fences aren't obnoxious looking, don't blank off the whole world, as long as the maintenance sheds and such are no more, you know, visual than they are right now, no larger, for not putting in storage sheds that are 30 foot high, so I wouldn't be opposed to it. So like I say, Parks Department do a good job with the parks, but parks are being obliterated. This is the oldest park in town. I believe it was 1906 that the park was established.
Well,
Okay.
well, thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony and the information you brought to us. I have no other persons signed up to testify, and I have no further questions for staff, so we'll move to the decision process. Mr. Mayor?
You have a rebuttal period.
I'm sorry?
Rebuttal.
Oh, yes, I'll open the floor to rebuttal, or the applicant wishes to rebut the comments, please.
Yeah, Rob McDonald, 611 Cleveland Boulevard, I have this morning. I don't have much to add, I just wanted to mention a couple things. There's a discussion about groundwater and pollution. This facility that is proposed here, the both buildings have appropriate drainage, trench drainage and treatment. There's a washout station to control that type of thing, so that should not be an issue. There's absolutely no plan, that I have ever heard of. In fact, there's been a lot of resistance, even if the discussion ever came up to close either of the baseball fields, so that is certainly not part of this, and certainly not contemplated at this point by the city. And the, one other thing I will mention is, this is a difficult market to be constructing in, but this project has been in need for many years, and the selection process that the city went through to select Design West for the architect and Benetton as the contractor is all appropriate per state statute, and we have gone through the right process, and we are extremely confident in this group. We've worked with both of these entities in the past, and we feel like we're going to get a very nice product at the end of the day. Aside from that, I don't have much else to add unless you have any questions for me.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Yeah, I think we're good with that.
Thank you.
And with that, I'll close the public hearing and go to the decision stage. For case SUP 21-18, Caldwell Parks and Recreation Department, we have the findings and facts stated on page 5 of the staff report. The Caldwell hearing examiner accepts the facts outlined in the staff report, public testimony, and the evidence list. All adopted city ordinances, standards, and codes were used in evaluating the application. The proposed use is conditionally permitted by the terms of the ordinance and is subject to conditions of approval. The conclusions of law. The Caldwell hearing examiner has the authority to hear this case in order that it be approved or denied. The public notice requirements are met, and the hearing was conducted within the guidelines of applicable Idaho Code and city ordinances. Section 8, the order of decision for SUP 21-18. Based on the findings of fact and conclusions of the law, the Caldwell hearing examiner hereby orders the case number SUP 21-18, the request by Michael Schlager, Design West Architecture for a special use permit to construct a new parks and recreation office and maintenance building on the current site of existing facilities within the R2 medium density residential zone located at 618 Irving Street in Caldwell, Idaho, is approved with the following conditions of approval. On page 6 of the staff report, we have conditions 8.2 through 8.9. And with that, included conditions of approval, I close this case and at the same time adjourn the hearing. Thank you for your participation. I appreciate your testimony. We're adjourned for the evening. Thank you.